Hello, BookTube, and we're back with a delayed SF in Dimension, where Scott Danielson, and I are discussing the essays of Alexei and Cory Panshin,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the second revised edition from 1980, SF in Dimension, a variety of essays, but this week it's a section of three essays on Robert A. Heinlein.
Right. The section is called Heinlein Reread. Yep. And it's 100 pages long, but it's three essays.
Yeah, well,
Well,
two
two
essays
essays. Yeah,
and a
two
short
essays
story.
and a story. Right. A very short story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Again. Yeah. You said last time, I believe, and I'm assuming you said this, so correct me if I'm wrong. You said that Heinlein was not fond of the Panshins.
Yeah, I should have had the. Oh, actually, I do have the book that the one that really uh, pissed him off. In other words,
Okay.
is
Oh, okay. So
Heinlein
that's
in
a
Dimension,
gotcha.
and
Interesting. It says introduction by James Blish.
yes, yeah,
Hmm. So is
yeah,
that a book that came out while the Panshins were around? I think the answer is yes. Right.
yes. This
Okay.
was actually before Cory Panshin.
Okay.
This was He did
Oh,
this himself.
of course. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, before he met her, and it came out in 1968. So
Right.
just before that,
And
and
James Blish was also a critic, right?
yeah,
He wrote
under
a lot of critical stuff.
Athling, he used that name, and there's two volumes by Advent Publishers of his early criticism,
Okay.
and
So
that's
he
that's
wrote his criticism under the name William Athling?
most of it. Yeah, not all of it, but a lot of
Did
early
uh,
stuff.
did people at the time know that that was him, or was it?
I think some other writers, but the public probably didn't quite know,
How interesting.
and
Yeah,
it probably took a while before even all writers knew. I think
yeah.
that he was, but I am not 100% sure on that.
Okay, yeah. That's
I
it's
reserve my
interesting
right
that
to
he'd use
change.
a pseudonym for that. It's
Yeah, I reserve the right to change my mind.
right. Very good. Very good. So essay number one is called "Reading Heinlein Subjectively," and I found this was really interesting stuff. So I'll just read this opening paragraph, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
just Aaron's here,
Hello, Aaron. Hey, and
Joseph
Joseph. Awesome.
and
And
Mick
Mick
is
Holland.
here.
Hello. Hi, everybody. So the opening paragraph says, when Robert Heinlein's science fiction stories are read objectively, that is, as though they had primary relevance in reference to existing things and extrapolations of existing things, difficulties and contradictions arise. Heinlein becomes a controversial figure. So I had to
Mark's
read
here,
that again. Hello, Rich, Mark. Hey,
just here for a second. He says
yeah,
he's
go Red
anyway.
Sox. I love it. So yeah, so I read that. That's a paragraph I had to read a couple times.
But
Um,
it makes a lot of sense though.
it does
Once
it
you
does
once
make a
you
lot of
read it.
sense. So it's saying, okay, if we read it objectively, again, as if it's commenting on real things and extrapolation of real things, then difficulties and contradictions arise in his writing, and then it's then that he becomes controversial, right?
Yeah,
And the opposite of that is to read him subjectively, which is the title of the essay, which is more of a personal way or more of a. I mean, how would you state that? Um,
yeah, and well, and also taking, I think, each story as it is, rather than taking what he's saying in one story and trying to, as a manifesto or something like that, of his political views or things like that. You just take each one, and even if he contradicts himself, enjoy it for what it is.
mm-hmm. And that's a really interesting topic in itself to me, um, because it is something that I've run into when you're reading criticism or people's opinions about authors or etc. It's I mean, to what extent do we assume that when an author writes something that it is reflecting their own political views?
Yeah, or racial views out of characters' mouths.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
is this what the author is saying, or
Yeah.
is he showing something of a type of person saying that?
Right. Is the author creating a character that has that point of view for a purpose?
Yeah,
Um, then I guess when you look at an author's whole work, or body of work, things are going to emerge. Um, I don't know. I mean, that's a deep subject because often I've read things about authors or works, and I'm like, man, they're really. I don't think that the author meant that. That's not what I got out of it. But yes, this character in that story had those views, or did these things.
and
Um,
then it also too is like there could be, as you say, the body of work itself could possibly have some hints of consistency throughout, and those are the things that are maybe difficult to find. uh
yeah,
it's
and
it's
surely it does, right? Because
Yeah,
when a writer does things, themes emerge whether the author wants them to or not, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
this is a person writing on paper, and they can't help but to exude whatever their worldview is, right? Just in the way that their characters act and everything like that. So it's
and
an
and it,
interesting line.
and it's a good way to start this essay, I think, because he goes on to talk about a few essays that Heinlein has written himself, and eventually talks about in in conventions of how he perceives what science fiction is and how he writes science fiction. So Heinlein states that he writes it objectively. He is talking about the real world, and
And thus the conflict, right?
yes, yeah. So
So he's insisting that he be read objectively,
yeah,
meaning I am projecting reality into the future, and I am making statements about situations, and I am extrapolating from that in the actions of my story and the setting of the story and the objects in the story. And
yeah,
Panshin says, well, if you read it that way, difficulties and contradictions arise.
yeah. And
Right,
he goes through and says, well, he's not, because here's the evidence.
right,
So
right.
he'll list the things. But then I like the quote, because I still haven't read the essay by Rottensteiner,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a really good quote near
Near the beginning here.
the second
Okay,
paragraph.
I've got it here, so I go
Yeah,
ahead and read it. It
yeah,
says, so this is by someone named Rottensteiner, Franz Rottensteiner.
yeah,
Um, it says, when an author makes a trivial error, such as writing of a Mars with breathable air, almost all SF critics will jump at him, for that is something that any schoolboy knows. But blunders in more complex fields, such as history, psychology, morals, or politics, will most likely remain unpunished.
yeah. And then, like previous to that, he talks about that Franz Rottensteiner has written an analysis of Heinlein entitled "Chewing Gum for the Vulgar." It
Hmm.
was in a fanzine,
Oh, wow.
um,
Yep.
and it describes Heinlein as naive, a fascist, a narcissist, a suppressed homosexual, an authoritarian, and a savage.
Why has no one called me a savage?
Yeah.
I want that one.
So
Yeah,
it's like, whoa, that's
yeah,
harsh.
that is harsh.
That's harsh.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, so that's interesting. So when an author makes a trivial error, writing of Mars, and SF critics jump at him, and that's fascinating stuff too, because remember Brian Aldiss wrote Hot House,
Yeah.
and he was jumped on uh, with glee. It felt like by critics, right? By SF critics, because they were like, "No way, this world is impossible," right? They said that what you've presented here is scientifically impossible, and it's presented as science fiction, and they jumped all over him.
And I think Larry Niven too, to a certain extent, for Ringworld, there was a lot of scientists or physicists that pointed out
Said
things
it's
where
impossible; it'll blow itself apart. It can't. Nothing could withstand. Yeah, I've heard all that stuff.
And then he eventually, I think, wrote that into the story and corrected things somehow.
Yeah, with the spanner coil or something like that. The Star Trek is solution by making up a name and saying this is dampening the forces. Right? So, but it's interesting as the statement that Rottensteiner makes is interesting again in a larger context, because we're talking about, hey, when they make an obvious scientific error, people jump on them, but the complex fields, like history, psychology, morals, or politics, I mean, there's only going to be a select few people that know enough history to say that what you just stated is actually incorrect. And I guess the flip side of that is, I imagine a lot of people sort of take in their history through fiction and are assuming that this is the way it was in a piece of historical fiction or something like that, when the author could be an error, or often like in the movies, like Napoleon, or we watch these historical epic films, and they come away saying, okay, that now I know that period of history, when often the screenwriter or director will change something for the story's sake. Yeah. And to make a compelling story rather than accuracy.
And no names of Napoleon.
Right. Yeah, right. So really interesting. So of course, though, they'll remain unpunished. And
the interesting thing is, because Heinlein, more so than I can think of a lot of, or I can't really think of anything off the top of my head of other science fiction writers that this has sort of been done to, because people latch on to things like Stranger in a Strange Land, and they almost model their lives on this political, philosophical view that he's created, and then somebody else will grab onto something else, and then that's where the controversy sort of, or the contradictions, and is it partially his own fault for doing this by saying, I am telling you reality, and people have believed that, rather than like Alexei and Cory Panshin, going through his stuff and saying, wait a minute, you're contradicting yourself in every story, because there's listings here of his political views, and it's just a variety of political views, which makes sense.
Yeah it makes sense for a writer to explore all that stuff, and do that. Now, this is a slight digression, but Stranger in a Strange Land, I mean, that darn near became a religion, didn't it? I mean, there were people that took it so seriously, and the philosophy in it. We almost had Scientology too, or I don't know.
He could have parlayed it into that, I think.
Yeah, I wonder if he could have. Yeah, because I do know that there was a lot of people that really took it seriously, and as a worldview that they held. Yeah.
And then that's where, like, from that, because he started writing that apparently in the 40s, and then he didn't finish it until later, but stuff that was extracted from it became the Juvenile Red Planet. So that just adds another level of people talking about indoctrination, type thing, because it gets quite convoluted with him, and I don't know why. Like, because my view of Heinlein, after reading a lot of his novels, several novels. I won't say them all, but more short fiction. And I've always liked his short fiction more than his novels. And I always had problems with his novels. But then after reading this, it sort of settled in my mind. The problems that I had were, I guess, either subconsciously or consciously reading it objectively. And I don't read science fiction so much objectively. Why have I read him almost objectively without
Wow, that's
realizing
an interesting thought. Because now I'm thinking, okay, do I read it objectively or something? To me, I guess it depends on the book. I would read, something like The Martian objectively. Because that's what the author is doing.
Yeah.
So it's really, I guess you could just call it the hard science fiction subgroup or subcategory. But other than that, science fiction always, most often, very often, science fiction has at least, even some of the hard stuff, has at least one thing that you have to give them and say, I'm not going to question this. And
but why?
but I don't. There are some that read science fiction, or even like things like Star Trek and stuff, where the details are kind of, it seems like, where they live in. It's like, they want the diagrams of the maps of the ships, and they want to know how fast it's going, and all this other stuff. I've never been like that. A nitpick where, they can't go warp 9.5 because blah blah. I don't get into that. But yet, things like The Martian, I do just love that. Hey, this is possible, right? This is the author is doing. He is standing on reality in that book, and projecting forward, and using the understanding that he has to create this story, and trying not to deviate and do anything that is impossible, right?
Yeah,
I appreciate that kind of writing, but not all science fiction is like that. Right?
No, but why have I? I think after reading this essay, I think I've approached Heinlein objectively, and
I think
why
I have
I
too.
done that? And is it because of other stuff you hear, other stuff you read, of what people are saying before I've read his essays to say what he has said, because other people have parroted that? And it's kind of weird. He is a writer that does this, and maybe because there's so much baggage around him that it causes this.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, when I think of stories like Gentlemen Be Seated, I know I brought that up before, or The Green Hills of Earth.
Yeah.
They feel like The Martian in a way, right? The Martian comes away after, right?
Yeah.
But they feel like, especially like a Gentlemen Be Seated, for those who don't know, so it takes place on the moon, and there's a reporter on the moon, and gets taken on a little tour of some of these tunnels on the moon, and then an accident occurs, and they're stuck in a tunnel. And, everything there just seems, oh, wow, I'm taking a tour of the future here,
Yeah.
And it's certainly that story, for example. And that's what I think of when I think of Heinlein. And I know that I haven't read anywhere near all of Heinlein. I've read a handful of novels and a bunch of short stories. But those short stories that I just mentioned are in the same category to me as like The Martian would be.
Yeah, and they're fabulous stories, and that's where I've always been under the contention that when he writes novels, it gets away from him. Like he wasn't able to sustain a novel, and that's why I'm doing this with Mark Richardson and you, the Heinlein sort of project,
right,
for me to sort of reassess him. Have I misconstrued that?
Interesting. Yeah.
And I'm beginning to think that yes, I have, but no, I haven't. Because yes, I have, because because I probably was reading him objectively. Now I'm thinking, I'm thinking of it subjectively. So it changes it a little bit, but then I still say so far everything I've read, it's the short stories that are good, and
Yeah,
the novels not so good.
right. Joseph has a comment here.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Did I like Shatner's famous or infamous "Get a Life" from SNL? I don't think I didn't like it. So just to clarify my comments there, it's like I've met Star Trek fans of many different types, right? And I remember talking to one person specifically about Deep Space Nine, and he said there's not enough battles in Deep Space Nine, and this was about let's say halfway through the series. But so to him, he was watching Star Trek for the battles, right? He was like, I want to see ships flying around. I want them shooting at each other, and that to me is Star Trek, right? And that's not what it is to me. It was much more than that. But so I was just saying that there are some people that are really in the nitty gritty. These details, and when these details are broken, it really makes them mad. You know what I mean? Or it's just an overall nitpicking thing. But I would tend to just give them that. One thing that drove me crazy in Star Trek is like when they tried to explain why Klingons in the original series looked like they did, and then why they looked in TNG the way they did, and that needed to be explained in some way. To me, that did not need to be explained. In fact, I thought it was silly that they tried to do it, and that makes me roll my eyes. But I am a big Star Trek fan, as you can see. Boom. But it's not. But it's. I'm just not that type of a fan where I'm gonna do that. That was my point there. But I love Star Trek fans. I am one.
Yeah.
Well, so Shatner's line, it was just like, dude, really? I don't know why. It was funny. It was just a comedy skit that he was doing, but
and
I don't know. And again, are we projecting that Shatner feels that way personally?
Exactly.
Because he keeps going on. He's at conventions all the time. So.
And the other thing is that some people may live Star Trek 24/7. They may have their bedroom look like a cabin on the Enterprise, and they wear pajamas that are, they may go through a whole thing. And then there's the other people who go to a convention and it's an escape. Yes. It's an escape for them. They pretend for a few days, and then they go back to being an accountant or whatever, or engineer.
And that would be my type. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love a good
what's wrong
convention.
with that? What's wrong with that? I suppose. Either way, unless the person literally, lives and breathes something 24/7 and it dictates everything they do, then you can maybe say, they have a bit of an addiction problem here. Whatever.
I love it. Yeah. So for me, I don't want to alarm anyone, but sometimes I watch Babylon 5. So.
And it wasn't me that said it this time.
Oh, I love that question, Joseph. Thank you. That's fun. A nice digression there. I love it. So, if we keep looking on in this, so where was that list? Was it in this essay that the list was? Well, I guess we can hit this,
well, it's realistic. The
realistic
next
fiction.
thing is Heinlein's argument that science fiction is fiction that takes science and facts into account.
Yeah. So Heinlein himself says, when I say fantasy fiction, I shall mean imaginary and not possible in the world as we know it. Conversely, all fiction which I regard as imaginary but possible, I shall refer to as realistic fiction, that is, imaginary but could be real so far as we know the real universe. Science fiction is in the latter class. It is not fantasy. And the Panshins earlier in the book have declared that most science fiction is fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I, in some ways, am drawn to Heinlein's definition there.
Yeah.
More
I would say so too, but I think that the word science fiction needs to be it's a subcategory of what we call science fiction that is fitting this definition.
Yeah.
because it seems like science fiction or speculative fiction, whatever we call it, has got a pretty wide group, and a lot of the space opera that we see is not trying to be real. Is not, it's like a science fiction setting with kind of a fantasy going on.
Yeah.
And science and Star Trek itself, I'd say, had become that. There's a lot of just hand wavium, they used to call it. I haven't heard that term for a long time, but hand wavium, it's it's a tachyon surge or something like that. So then I really like these tables. So these are Heinlein's tables, not Panshin's. But he says realistic fiction includes historical fiction, contemporary scene fiction, realistic future scene fiction. That's all in realistic fiction. And fantasy fiction is fantasy laid in the past, fantasy laid in the present, fantasy laid in the future. And then he says class 3 contains only science fiction. A small amount of science fiction may also be found in class 1 and class 2. So, yeah. And it is also interesting, this is almost ties into the Star Trek conversation, to be trying to define it like this and have that definition be so important is itself a kind of a fandom kind of a situation, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is the equivalent to the plans of the Enterprise and measuring the dimensions of Captain Kirk's quarters and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, it's like the old. It has become an old saying. You put 10 science fiction fans in a room, and you have them define science fiction, and you'll get like 15 definitions of science fiction.
Yeah,
from 10 fans. So it's like nobody can agree on it, and it has become. People will defend, and I've been known to argue too of certain things, because you do have your bête noirs, and you want to squash this thing because that's not really science fiction, or that's still science fiction, and somebody else will say that that's fantasy,
right.
And all this stuff. But then the Panshin sort of cut through that and say, well, it's all fantasy. And
right.
it's fantasy in a larger sense, not fantasy of what, like I said before, fantasy has a bit of a baggage with it, because now it does mean certain things. When you do say fantasy, they generally mean magic,
right.
and that kind of thing, where it used to have a slightly different meaning, made up.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, and then here's a big paragraph here. It says, Heinlein further argues, the past is dead, the present fleetingly gone, only the future may be affected. Therefore, Heinlein says, I must assert that speculative fiction is much more realistic than is most historical and contemporary scene fiction, and is superior to them both. I agree with the last part. It's certainly where I spend most of my time. I just love it,
Well, Panshin's,
but much more realistic is an interesting thing.
Yeah, because I think even the Panshins would agree to a certain extent that, because like a lot of people have said that science fiction actually tells you is more realistic of the world than other fiction, because other fiction leaves out usually anything to do with science and its impact on culture and society.
Yeah,
and
some of it is leans so heavily on science that it kind of leaves the people out.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing, So speculative fiction is much more realistic than is most historical. So if I stop right there, then most historical fiction, because a lot of historical fiction I've read seems to me equivalent to fantasy, because there is a world building there. And some of the best authors are doing their best to be accurate to what they know of history, right? But some authors are using that historical background simply as a setting, and they're not attempting to be accurate.
Yeah,
right?
or it's the trappings are accurate, the surroundings, but they have something to use that historical setting to to make a political statement, to make a
Mhm.
religious statement,
Yeah.
and not changing events, but manipulating what people are doing and
Yeah.
what they're saying.
As all historians do, right? You
Exactly.
know, I mean, the objective of a historian is to be objective, right?
Yeah.
But they've all got their own baggage that they're carrying,
Yeah.
and
And
yeah,
they're gonna pick out things
hmm,
that fit their thesis
right,
and leave the other stuff
right,
behind,
right,
or dismiss them in some way.
yeah. Wow, this is fascinating, yeah, because there's no way for a piece of history in print, right, to be 100% accurate because it's impossible. Because it reminds me, Stanislav Lem wrote a book once called One Human Minute. It's got a few essays in it, but in there is a fake review or a review of a book that doesn't exist. It's impossible. An impossible book called One Human Minute, which describes everything that occurred on Earth in 1 minute.
That's a big
And
book.
it's a huge book, right? And the piece in the book, I think it's brilliant, is a review of that non-existent book. But yeah, so it's impossible to get all that. But anyway, so in that way, it is kind of like fantasy, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a way, a lot of historical fiction would be pretty much a fantasy. I'm not meaning magic or anything like that, but again, they're using that as a setting, the same way that a space opera uses a science fiction setting, and so that's interesting. So he says, I must assert that speculative fiction is much more realistic than is most historical, and then he says, and contemporary scene fiction. So I imagine that would just be our general fiction
Yeah.
about something that's happening
I
contemporary.
want to say something about his use of the term speculative,
Go ahead,
because
yeah.
that again is as varied and wide as the term science fiction, and he's referring to, or this quote is from an essay that was in a sort of symposium that was written in the late 40s, and this is where Heinlein talks about what he believes speculative fiction is, which is very different from what Harlan Ellison viewed it as Ursula K. Le Guin and Judith Merrill. They all have their different views. So it's not like, again, because when people hear the term speculative fiction, they're going to think of certain things, and you almost have to throw those out when dealing with this because that predates all these.
Excellent. Great point. Excellent point. Yeah, very interesting. We got a new comment there.
Yeah, Jim from Mr.
Oh, Jim.
Mayhem. Hey guys, thought I'd drop in quickly. I'm working, but wanted to say hi. I'll keep you in the background. Everybody does that. We're always in the background.
Yeah, I love it. Well, good. Yeah, so if we skip now to the end of this essay, the Panshins sort of present, they say that Heinlein's got 3 crises, right?
Yeah.
And this is interesting thing. So then they quote stories that he's written, and then are just trying to show. In fact, the last line of the essay is objectivity cannot encompass these statements. Only Heinlein's subjectivity can. So they're basically showing that he's holding these different points of view.
Yeah, because with different phases in his life that he went through, because he had tuberculosis. He wanted to do be in the Navy. He had tuberculosis, so he had to reinvent himself in a sense. And
that it would assume that a person is just fully formed at some point, and when they start writing, they're going to be frozen in time, and not going to grow and change and move through time. The way that the Panshins actually are in this collective essay so far, they're saying things that are later contradicted.
Yeah.
Right, by themselves, simply because of new information, or delved deeper, or their thoughts have changed, or anything like that. So, are they saying that they need to be read subjectively?
Well, I think they are,
Yeah.
so they haven't said it in so many words,
Mm-hmm.
but I think they are to a certain extent. Yeah, like I have an objective opinion, but take it subjectively.
Yeah. But so here's an example. This is from Double Star. It's really short, but it says, so this is a quote from the book Double Star. But there is a solemn satisfaction in doing the best you can for 8 billion people. Perhaps their lives have no cosmic significance, but they have feelings. They can hurt. Okay. And then the very last one is from Glory Road, which is one of the books we're reading this year.
That's next month, I think.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
So I can't recall. I think next month is Assignment in Eternity.
Oh yeah. That's the month after. Yeah.
Okay. So his quote from Glory Road is, "Democracy can't work. Mathematicians, peasants, and animals, that's all there is. So democracy, a theory based on the assumption that mathematicians and peasants are equal, can never work. Wisdom is not additive. Its maximum is that of the wisest man in a given group." Yeah. And then Stranger in a Strange Land. "My dear, I used to think I was serving humanity, and I pleasured in the thought. Then I discovered that humanity does not want to be served. On the contrary, it resents any attempt to serve it. So now I do what pleases Jubal Hershaw." And that, see, again, I mean, well, what I have here is a character whose viewpoint is in opposition to the first character that we read.
Yeah, and that's
Right.
what the patches are showing. So
Yeah.
he's not, if you read this objectively, then you take the first one as objective. That's what life is like, the reality is like. But then you read the other one, well, that's also saying that the reality is like this. But yeah, they don't mesh.
Wow.
They're not the same
Yeah. I
thing.
mean, they
So
don't mesh, but I don't see that that's a problem.
no, but
You
reading it objectively, it
Yeah.
becomes a problem. But you read it
Well,
subjectively,
only,
it's not a
yeah,
problem.
again, only if you're assuming that everything that Heinlein, every statement out of these characters' mouths are Heinlein's personal point of view, and I don't think that that's right.
No, and Heinlein never really said that so much, I don't think, but he implies that what he is showing is reality, so therefore it is.
Yeah, but that's interesting. I mean, it is reality that a person can hold these points of view and have these feelings.
Yeah.
I used to think I was serving humanity, and I pleasured in the thought. Then I discovered that it does not want to be served. On the contrary, it resents any attempt to serve it. Right? That's a character going through something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that it's a statement of philosophical belief. You know what I mean? But to me,
Heinlein, no.
that there is a person that holds that view, and a person that holds the view that anything I can do to help 8 million people or 8 billion people, that those two people exist in the universe is
Yeah.
subjective to me, or objective. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So really, their point is that Heinlein, their point is that Heinlein is inconsistent philosophically and morally if you take his
And politically.
writings as a whole.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I can argue with that, but I also don't see a problem with it, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't think they see a problem with it either.
Okay.
They see a problem with you reading it objectively, like reading it as, the other way. Like, so that's why you should read it subjectively. So therefore, you read it the way it should be.
Yeah.
Like, and not as a manifesto.
Right.
Like,
So are they then responding to Heinlein stating that it should be the opposite, and is that kind of it? Or I just don't know, chicken and egg thing. Did they write this and then Heinlein responded, or did they write Heinlein in Dimension and then or Alexei wrote that, and then Heinlein responded to them, or was Heinlein out there saying something, and then they wrote this in response?
That I'm not 100% sure. I know
Yeah.
there was a response by him, and then there was, and they actually responded to a few things
Hmm.
on an essay, and I read it, but I can't remember what it is now. And it's sort of the controversy around Heinlein and the pensions, what has been blown out of proportion a little bit as well,
Oh, has it? Okay.
to a certain extent. But he didn't like what they said because they basically were saying you said this in your essays of this, but you're not doing that.
Hmm.
You're doing something else, and
I
he
see.
didn't like to be criticized. Period.
Yeah. Who
I,
does?
I don't think so.
Yeah. I
Yeah, he didn't
gotcha.
like to be edited. He didn't like any of the
Yeah.
stuff. He wanted things the way he had it,
Yeah.
which I think he had a huge ego, which a lot of people do and a lot of authors do.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. So this second essay, which is called "Time Enough for Love," which is the title of one of Heinlein's novels, which I have not read, and neither had the Panchins when they wrote this, which is the strangest thing. I just don't know what to make of this. It's basically the longest review of a book the reviewer has never read that I've ever read.
but you see, like it's a very strange. But they go through of his career, of his writing, and then they're harkening back. That's why I think it works. Well, that doesn't quite work, but it's as a companion to the first one subjectively,
Uh-huh.
because they talk about three crises and they talk about things that are happening in his life, and he's trying to do this. Like he's trying to. He has this worldview here, and
Mm-hmm.
then it doesn't quite. He can't quite
Wow. Can you
encapsulate it.
imagine as an author
And
actually reading this and engaging
then,
with it? It's like, I see a lot of authors say, I don't read reviews. I don't do this, and a lot of them do. But if you have this in your head when you're trying to write and just thinking about what's going to be said about stuff, man, that would just lock me up and I'd be done. You know?
because the thing is, the pensions do some interesting things, but they get like the crises that they're talking about in the first one. And okay, those crises are events in Heinlein's life that were quite momentous.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the second essay, they get into more less not crises so much, but what he's thinking and feeling. And it's the kind of thing that if somebody is a great friend of somebody and they've known them for decades and they have discussions about everything, that's the kind of person that could write something like this and be competent, I think, of saying that, yeah, we had discussions and he was struggling with, something that's happened or some
Mm.
event that's happened, and he's trying to work that into his own life. And that's what they're doing there, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't know him that well. And it just seems a bit contrived, even though I
Yeah.
love what the Panchins do, but that essay is a bit contrived, I think.
Yeah. I think so too. And like I said, it was struck me in the way that I said before. So at the very beginning, they said, "We have just seen an announcement that a new Robert Heinlein novel is to be published in May of 1973, his first book since I Will Fear No Evil in 1970. That's an event that calls for comment." And this is a long essay. This is
Yeah.
one heck of a long comment. And it says, time, so I'm skipping some. Time enough for love may prove to be a greater embarrassment than I will fear no evil. On the other hand, I mean, they're talking about a book they have not read, right? On the
Yeah,
other
at that
hand,
point, but
at
then
that point, right,
yeah,
it might be the true masterpiece that Heinlein has never written. A true SF masterpiece is going to be written soon, this year, next year, and it would be appropriate if Heinlein wrote it. He always followed a secret star. He has earned the right to grasp it. Whether or not it is successful, Time Enough for Love unquestionably must be his best attempt. Isn't that something?
And I guess it's
To me, I mean, that's a remarkable thing. And then we got this huge essay now. And every now and then, again, it says, if we are to judge time enough for love with anything that approaches true justice, we need to reconsider science fiction and Robert Heinlein's place in its development. It's like, what on earth? They haven't read the book.
Yeah, and I guess it's a thought process to say, okay, what has he done up to this point, and then what's the potential for this book?
Yeah,
and it's not really a review, I guess. It's a or it's a review of his writing career, I guess.
Yeah. See, I mean, there's a statement. Now, here I am at the end, right? Time enough for love will be a true and honest success only if that road is finally taken, which is, the stuff that comes before.
Yeah.
Love has never been a Heinlein theme. That is because love is the absence of ego. It is past time for Heinlein to love. It's like, what? This to me is like, I don't know. It's uncomfortable to me,
Yeah, it was very strange. Because I just read it in the last couple of days. You read it a few weeks ago, I think you said.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm going. This is, it just didn't gel with me. I really liked the reading Heinlein subjectively. There was lots of stuff in there that was good.
Oh yeah, plenty of interesting. Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting here too. But the context, man.
Yeah, because it is interesting. He goes through the stories because he talks about the Anson McDonald's stories sort of as a whole, and they see sort of some themes in there that are interesting, and then moves back to other stories, and then the thing that really is the oddity is the third bit.
Oh yeah, that one's really odd. Yeah, that was something. It wasn't even an essay. And please, so this one really washed over me, and I feel like we talked a little bit about it right before we got live. Yeah. So now I want to read it again with that in mind because I didn't know what to make of it. But please explain what's going on here. So the story, and I'm going to call it a short story. It's called "Found in Space" by R. Monroe Weems, but of course it was written by the Panshins, right?
Yeah.
And so please explain. It was in Amazing in April of 1974.
Yeah. Well, I had to look this up because I knew it was them that wrote it, but I'm going, why is it in here? Mm-hmm. So on their website, they have a little. They have it, the story there, but they have a little preface saying that while they were writing the big essay, he had this thought of a fictional story that sort of explains things. And as you're saying that he has the promise to write this, but is he going to fulfill the promise? The story is about a human child that's being raised by. Is it? I can't remember now. Is it chipmunks or something?
Yeah, giant mutant chipmunks.
Yeah, yeah, and but the child has been put in there to do something to get the chipmunks out, or he's there for a mission, and he's forgotten his mission, and then it's like, well, we'll have to do this over again, and then what's the very last line of the story?
Let me grab it. It is Cheap 3:16, which is, I'm sure, a reference to John 3:16, right? The wider world awaits. Save this note for future reference.
And it's just going to repeat, and he's forgotten himself again,
right?
And he hasn't fulfilled his mission. Heinlein is not fulfilling his mission to write this. I think that's what he's.
I think you're right. I think you're right, and. Yeah, I read this and I was like, what on earth is this? Yeah. How interesting. and to connect it to John 3:16 too. Yeah, that's fascinating. But yeah, it's a tiny story, very, very, very small. And yeah, how interesting.
Yeah, it's so bizarre.
But but the bizarre thing is they don't know if the whole essay before that, they don't know if he fulfilled anything. Have you read Time Enough for Love, by the way?
I don't think so. No, I don't think I have.
Yeah, I have not either, so I can't comment. If anybody out in the audience has, I'd love to hear it. Is it a good book?
Yeah,
Um,
and that's a bit of a problem reading this big essay, is because either I've read quite a few of those short stories,
Me
but I
too.
don't remember the details of them.
Yeah, and he
So
mentions a
so
lot of
it's
them, right?
so I'm reading this, and you're reading it too, of going, okay, that's interesting, but okay, I don't really get the impact of what they're saying. But I think the over impact basically is he has a promise. He has the ability to do this, to write something great. Will he do it?
Yeah, but it's just a crazy concept.
Yeah, and
So
it's
here's
like
here's
it
another
could.
thing. Here's another thing that I highlighted in it, right? So it says, "Time Enough for Love may be a wretched book. It will be if it is a picaresque episodic novel filled with heavy-handed philosophic pronunciamentos in place of honest confrontation. If its great size is bloat, if time enough means continuance rather than evolution, if love is confused with sex, in that case it will not be profound. It will be a desperately bad book. Time Enough for Love will be a good book only if the confrontation that Heinlein has always avoided is made, if it is made on the right grounds with the right question asked and answered in the right way." Good heck, man. They
Yeah,
haven't read the book.
yeah.
It's just like, what? Yeah, I've just never read anything like it.
It's navel gazing,
I have
a
never read
navel
anything like it.
gazer, navel gazing in a
Yeah.
sense.
Hey,
Uh,
Joseph has read the book. Yeah.
yeah, just go through. Alex is there.
Huh?
The reviews should be specific to the book. Yeah.
Yeah. How odd. So the Panchins are. It's like they're deflating a balloon. It's like the publisher has put out a balloon and said, "Time Enough for Love is going to be this magnificent work." And before they've even read it, they're going to pop this balloon and say, "This is in a way, to me, they're saying this is what we predict it will be." And here's Joseph saying, "Yeah, it was a bit too long," right?
Yeah,
You know,
and they were
and
right, and so
yeah,
therefore they were right. The
right.
answer
So
was
it
right.
is. It's like we're saying, yeah, in that paragraph I just read, they're saying this is what it's going to be, and yeah, to me, it's no wonder that Heinlein's not a fan. You know, again, if I read that and was still trying to write, I would be like trying to write to prove them wrong, and then that
Yeah,
just becomes a mess at that point, right?
yeah, and
So,
it is so odd. It's just it's like, I guess it's something that, like, you and I could discuss in
mhm.
private.
Yes, exactly.
It,
Yeah, this new book is coming out. No, man, I think it's probably going to be more of the same. And it's, I'm not that excited about it, but I'm going to read it. It's exciting enough to us that we're talking about it. So,
yeah, it's the same
yeah.
thing as going back to Babylon 5, the
Hmm.
reboot that was going to be, like, how much discussion has been on that kind of thing, and it's
Yeah.
before it's even out to find
Before,
out what it's
yeah.
like.
Yeah, and you've got people, yeah, that are like, oh, the Babylon 5 reboot will be horrible. And
Yeah,
it's impossible for it to be XYZ. Yeah. How funny. Yeah, this is like fandom just on a page here. It's fun. But yeah, I've just never read anything like this. But you're right. It is conversation that we have. That's a good point. It's conversation that we have as fans. We're
and
really
and
excited about this new thing coming out.
they said right at the beginning of their introduction of what is in here. So
Hmm.
even like, I think they hinted at that some of this stuff could be embarrassing. So they
Uh-huh.
may look back on this that it was embarrassing,
Yeah.
but it helped their thought process as they go
Yeah.
along.
But it's a thing to help your thought process. It's another one to publish this thing.
Exactly,
So it
exactly.
was, I'm not sure what Apollo is, but it says it was in Apollo,
Yeah,
summer
it
in
was. I
1976.
think, yeah, Apollo was a sort of semi-professional, something like Galileo. I think it was.
Okay.
It was another one of those sort of semi-professional magazines,
Yeah.
if I remember right. But again, I reserve the right to change my mind once I find out that I'm
Yeah.
wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a quote at the very beginning of this essay. It says, "The unfortunate one is he who averts his head from this door, for he will not find another door." And it's Sadi of Shiraz. It's
Yeah.
quoted. So I don't know what that is, but anyway, interesting, fascinating stuff, man. This is good stuff, and you're going to talk about Heinlein today. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be there,
Yeah.
but hopefully you have a good group. It looks like you do, and you're going to be talking about
Well,
Star
actually,
Beast.
it's only going to be Pat and myself.
Oh, really? Oh, I
Yes.
thought you had some others in that group.
Yeah. No. Mark is.
Yeah, Mark was out, but there was
Yeah.
another person I thought was in.
Yeah. I thought
Randy Ray, right?
Randy Ray, but yeah, I don't think he hasn't
Okay.
come back and say he's going to do it.
Well, I will look forward to seeing that. I won't be there live, but I'll definitely take a look.
Yeah, because I wanted to read. I might be able to. It depends how long it is. Because I was going to read the Rottensteiner essay.
Yeah.
I'll if you're interested, I'll send you the
Please do.
the
Please
link
do.
to it because it's a fanzine. Because
That would be great.
I thought I'd read it, and I'll see. I don't know if I got time to do it now, but that might be something we can refer back to next week or something like that.
That would be really great. So our next section of this book is called The Renewal of SF. And it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 essays. Actually, a smaller number of pages in our last section because they went on and on about that book they never read. And this is again. I totally have enjoyed reading this. So, but yeah, thank you, Joseph. Yeah. But so whatever date, I imagine a month or so down the line, we'll do renewal.
Yeah, or possibly even next week. You don't know how much.
Oh, it's possible. I could probably do it. Yeah. Don't you have? So we're gonna have a live on Empire.
Yes.
Right, and that's next week. Wasn't there something else next week too?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, we won't be able to do it next week. Yeah. So we got Empire, Simac, and Engines of God.
Engines of God, right? That was it.
And I've got to read Engines of God yet. So,
okay. Yeah. There you go.
So we won't be able to do it next Saturday because that's out. So it'll have to be the Saturday after. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds great to me. Yeah. Should be
really
good. I'm not going anywhere that I know of.
And then it gives us a little more to read the Rottensteiner, and I was thinking too maybe the where is it here? I had it. There it is. No, it's not. Oh, it is. It's here. Because he refers to the essay, or in here, I think. Oh, no, not in here. Sorry. Damon Knight's essay about Heinlein. So I thought it might be interesting.
And it's not in that book, right?
No, it's in Anatomy of... Not Anatomy. Search of Wonder.
Oh, okay.
Search of Wonder.
Right, in Search of Wonder. Yeah, by Damon Knight. There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. It's on Kindle for $5.
Yeah.
I don't have that one in... I have the Futurians by Damon Knight, but I don't have In Search of Wonder. So
is that the third edition
of the Kindle edition?
Yeah.
It says, this expanded third edition is 150,000 words, up from 120 in the 1967 second.
Yeah, I've got the first edition, I've got the second edition, and I've got the third editions.
Oh, cool! Wow. It's got a list of the essays in there too, so that's cool.
Yeah. So there must be one because I've used it. I've read bits and pieces because it's sort of a collection. It's one of the first actual dedicated criticism. The books that came out, and it was done by Advent Publishers. It was their first publication.
Okay.
And
so I have that now. It was $5. I went ahead and grabbed it.
Yeah, Jim.
Jim. Thank you, Jim.
Enjoyed it. It's like I wasn't quite sure how we're going to deal with that long essay, but like you can't pick it through apart unless it would take longer to pick it apart, but you'd have to read all the stories. And do that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good stuff. Well, great. Well, thank you, Sean. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, and we're continuing because there's so many collections of essays because there's we could go right back to that original one where Heinlein talks about speculative fiction, and it's a very, very short one too. It's like there's a lot of these things that are very important in the history of criticism of science fiction,
Yeah.
of these books,
Yeah.
because it's a strange, or I think it's a strange thing where they'll do a symposium, but it's like the editor says, "Okay, Scott, you're going to write on this." You know, somebody else is going to write
Yeah.
on this. Give me
Right.
those essays, and we'll put them in a book,
There you go.
and we'll explore these ideas.
Yeah. Love it. Love it.
So,
All
anyway,
right.
thanks everybody for
Thanks
stopping
again.
by.
You bet.